If your reentry or tech organizations are built on grind and guilt, you're not motivating people. You're actually burning and pushing them out. So today, I want to show you what happens when cultures are built on healing instead of the hustle. Let's talk about the core problem. So there's many reentry and tech organizations, and I'm guilty of this as well. But in my experience, we've unintentionally imported hustle culture into our organization. And it could show up as constant urgency. It shows up as heroic workloads and pressure disguised as realism. Let's just be real about it. And that logic sounds like, hey, the job market is tough. Our funding stream is tight right now and the stakes are high. We need everybody to lock in. That's one of my favorite words. Hey, we got to lock in right now. But when people are already carrying instability, stress, and trauma, more pressure actually doesn't build resilience. It drains capacity and it could really impact the mental health of the people on your team. And what's often misunderstood that is hustle culture doesn't just burn out our staff. It burns and pushes out our participants and it quietly filters them out, not because of a lack of motivation, but because the environment is designed for compliance and endurance and constant performance and hitting the mark when in reality it should be designed for learning and integration and empathy and sustainability. How does one get from point A to point B successfully? That's what we're trying to figure out. So let's name three things that grind and guilt actually creates within the workspace. Number one, performance becomes the price of belonging. And in hustle culture, you earn your spot by being on point and showing visible support and never slowing down your team or the system. And sometimes in reentry work, many participants are rebuilding their lives, whether that's transportation, their family, their health, probation requirements, or housing. Those are some of the challenges that most BIPOC community members are experiencing. And when the programs that we're leading becomes a pressure test, the people with the most complexity will always disappear first. I have a saying that life is always going to life. And it's not because of a lack of commitment. It's because life is life. So is it really their fault or is it a design problem within our systems? The second challenge that grind and guilt presents is human needs getting reframed as moral failure. Yeah, we got to talk about this because grind culture, right? You got to come in and if you want rest, you're not hungry enough. If you need flexibility, you have too many excuses. And when you struggle, you're not coachable, you're not teachable anymore. And that teaches people to hide what they're dealing with. And most of us want cultures where people can bring them full selves. But if we are focusing on grind and hustle all of the time, then where does that actually fit in for people? This teaches people to hide what they're dealing with. And when people hide what they're dealing with, leaders lose critical information, trust disintegrates, and support usually comes in too late. Now let's talk about the third challenge that grind and guilt creates within our organizations. Grind creates shallow outcomes that just look good on paper. Pressure can produce short-term attendance, quick outputs, and credential completion. But we really got to ask ourselves some real questions here, right? So do these skills actually hold up when life begins to life? Do people stay connected after they experience setbacks? And do they feel safe asking for help early? Now, hustle culture optimizes on throughput, but healing centered leadership optimizes for continuity. Now, let's reframe healing centered leadership because sometimes it is labeled as soft. So, a more accurate frame, in my experience, is servant leadership. Servant leadership is a philosophy where the leader prioritizes serving others, whether that's employees, community members, or customers, over their own power or status, and focusing on the growth, well-being, and empowerment of their team and those that they lead. It treats capacity as the limiting resource and motivation. Now let's talk about what changes in practice when you implement healing-centered leadership. Number one, it's regulation before acceleration. The key question shifts from how do we push people harder to what conditions actually help people think clearly, learn consistently, and stay engaged. In reentry and tech training, learning is cognitive, stress narrows attention, and stress shortens patience. Like it definitely shortens mine. But when leaders build, right, in healing centered leadership, when leaders build in that practice, there's clarity, there's pacing, there's psychological safety, and people don't just feel better. There's transformation from the inside and out. Now, let's talk about number two. Coercion is replaced with consent-based structure. So we got hustle culture, which relies on social pressure, keeping up or falling behind, or even the fear of failing. And then we have healing centered, or what I call servant leadership, that has standards, but it makes the path visible and achievable for the people that they lead. And it ensures expectations are explicit, support is normalized, and flexibility is planned into the infrastructure and not freestyle, not improvised. We have built this into our culture to see people win. That's what we want to see because this reduces the fear of messing up. And that fear of messing up is one of the biggest hidden drains on performance. I've learned from experience, from my personal growth and story to being able to lead large teams. Now, lastly, number three, setbacks become data, not defects. Let's dive a little deeper there, right? So let's be honest about reentry works. Setbacks are not the exceptions. Like they're just a part of the ecosystem and the terrain. And what that can look like sometime is missed sessions, there's conflict, and unfortunately, housing instability, relapse, overwhelm, family crisis. And what servant leaders don't do is we don't romanticize these setbacks. Although I'm a firm believer that setbacks are setups for a comeback. For anybody that has that grit, that's what life can look like, right? We should not punish people for being human. We should build systems that keep people connected long enough to recover forward. And here's the piece that I want to hold into the end because this is where the real outperforming happens, right? Healing centered and servant leadership isn't about being nicer. Let's make that very clear. It isn't about that. We're going to be kind and respectful, but it's about reducing attrition. Attrition is the most expensive and most overlooked failure mode. Why? Because grind and guilt culture constantly pays for staff burnout, participant dropouts, and that means that there's broken trust in constant recruiting and restarting programs and another onboarding here. And we have to contract this person, and we're never able to really get the data that we need according to the work that we say that we're doing. Let's talk about it, right? And it looks like movement, but it's really just churn. Now, let's talk about the payoff because if the cultures that we set as leaders is grind based, you will constantly pay the cost of replacement. Like the retention cost is high. But when you're building on healing, staff stay resourced to be consistent, they're loyal, they're dedicated, they stay long enough to integrate the skills that they're learning and become leaders, and relationships becomes transformational. And that's something that is very important to us in the EW community. Stronger outcomes that are less fragile, and we're not building anything off of adrenaline. We want to see transformation really happen, and we want to see healing really happen within our community. So it isn't about ambition versus comfort. If we're thinking about building systems, they should extract effort that sustain progress that lead to transformational change within our organizations, the culture, and even the people that we serve. So it's just something to think about.